the day Serena Voss walked into the Meridian Tech showcase with a cracked phone screen and a prototype wrapped in a dish towel. Half the room had already written her off. She didn't belong there. Everyone could see it. The Meridian Showcase was the kind of event where people wore Italian leather shoes and spoke in acronyms, ARR, SAS, B2B, and the badge around your neck was practically a social credit score. Serena's badge said Voss Fabrication Founder, no logo, no tagline. Printed on cardstock, not the laminated kind. She had driven 4 hours from Decatur to get there. The convention center in downtown Chicago smelled like fresh carpet and money. Rows of exhibition booths stretched across the floor, each one lit like a jewelry display. Sleek monitors, backlit signage, staff in matching polos handing out branded pens. Serena walked through the doors carrying a cardboard box held together with packing tape, her 8-year-old daughter, Wren, trailing behind her, gripping a juice box. Wren had not been part of the plan. The sitter had canceled at 6 that morning. Serena had stood in the kitchen for exactly 45 seconds, letting herself feel the full weight of that before she braided Wren's hair, packed a coloring book, and loaded the car. She found her booth at the far end of Hall C, next to the emergency exit, and a pillar that blocked half the foot traffic. Table number 47, the smallest designation they gave out, typically reserved for first-timers and long shots. She set the box down and started unpacking. The prototype was not pretty. It was a handheld soil analysis device, compact, utilitarian, built from components she had sourced from 3 different suppliers and assembled herself in her garage over 11 months. The casing was matte black, scratched in 2 places. The screen was small. Nothing about it said innovation. Everything about it said I made this myself because no one else would. Wren climbed onto the folding chair and opened her coloring book without being asked. By 9:30, the floor was crowded. Serena watched investors and buyers move through the booths in clusters, stopping at the glossy ones, the loud ones, the ones with demo videos playing on loop. Nobody stopped at table 47. She didn't panic. She had been invisible before. She had learned to work with it. What she had not expected was Colton Mercer. Colton Mercer was the kind of man who arrived at events like this already certain of his own relevance. He was the CEO of Agravance Capital, one of the 3 largest agricultural investment firms in the Midwest, and he moved through the convention floor with the particular ease of someone who had never once questioned whether he deserved to be in a room. Late 40s, silver-templed, jacket perfectly cut, the kind of man who had other people carry his business cards so he didn't have to reach into his own pocket. He was flanked by 2 associates when he came around the pillar and stopped short at table 47. He looked at the prototype. He looked at Serena. He looked at Wren, who was coloring a picture of a horse. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that was worse than a frown. "This yours?" he said, nodding at the device on the table. "It is," Serena said. "Voss Fabrication, portable soil analysis, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, moisture, pH. Results in under 90 seconds, no lab required." Colton picked it up without asking. He turned it over in his hands the way someone handles a garage sale find they're deciding isn't worth $1. "How much did this run you to build?" "The prototype, around $4,000. He set it down. "And you're here pitching this?" "I am." He glanced at his associates with an expression that required no translation. One of them looked away. The other made a small sound in his throat that was almost a laugh. "I'll be honest with you," Colton said, in the tone of a man who considered honesty a gift he was giving. "This looks like something a high school science class put together for a state fair." He straightened his cuffs. "The market you're targeting, commercial agriculture, they're not going to pick up something that looks like this. Optics matter. Packaging matters. You understand that, right?" Serena looked at him steadily. "I understand that. You've got a kid here. That's a lot, doing this while managing that." He said it like a compliment. It wasn't. "My advice? Maybe start smaller. Local farmers market, hobbyist growers. Work your way up." He walked away before she could respond. Wren looked up from her coloring book. She had heard every word. "Is he mean?" she asked. Serena took a breath. "He's wrong," she said. "That's different." She straightened the prototype on the table, repositioned the small information card she'd printed, checked the battery level, and waited. What Colton Mercer did not know, what almost nobody at that showcase knew, was that Serena Voss had spent the last 6 years working as an agronomist for one of the largest farming cooperatives in southern Illinois. She had walked thousands of acres of soil. She had watched farmers lose entire seasons because they didn't have access to real-time data. She had seen what happened when the decision to fertilize was made on instinct instead of information. Money wasted, yields crushed, families strained. She had pitched the idea of a portable field-use sensor to her cooperative director 3 years ago. He had told her it wasn't viable. Too much variance in field conditions. Too expensive to produce at scale. He'd said it kindly, which almost made it worse. So she went home and started building it herself. Not because she was reckless, because she knew the problem better than anyone who had told her it couldn't be solved. She had used every weekend for 11 months. Her garage, a folding table, a soldering kit she bought used on eBay. Wren had grown up doing homework at that table, listening to her mother talk through calibration problems out loud. At some point, Wren had started handing her the right tools without being asked. The first version had failed completely. The second had worked inconsistently. The third, the one on table 47, had been tested in 14 different soil conditions across 5 counties. It was accurate to within 2.3% of lab results. She had the data. She had the field documentation. She had letters from 4 farmers who had agreed to be references. She had driven 4 hours to tell someone about it. By 11 o'clock, the showcase floor had shifted into its mid-morning rhythm, quieter in some booths, louder in others. A small crowd had gathered near the center stage where a company was demoing an automated irrigation controller. Serena watched the crowd from her booth and did what she always did when she was nervous. She stayed still. A woman stopped at table 47. She was in her early 60s, practical clothes, no badge lanyard, which meant she was a buyer or a press contact, someone who hadn't registered through the official channel. She picked up the device the same way Colton had, but differently. She turned it over slowly. She read the information card. She read it again. "What's the error margin?" she said. 2.3% variance against standard lab analysis, Serena said, tested across 14 field environments. "I have the data if you want to see it." The woman looked up. "Show me." Serena opened her laptop. For the next 20 minutes, they went through the field testing documentation together. The woman asked precise questions about temperature sensitivity, about battery performance in cold weather, about the calibration protocol. Serena answered everyone. She knew every answer the way you know things you have lived with for a long time. When they finished, the woman closed the laptop gently. "I'm Eleanor Tate," she said. "I run procurement for Groundwork Agricultural Supply. We have distribution across 9 states." She paused. "Who else have you talked to today?" Serena hesitated. "You're the first person who stopped." Something moved across Eleanor's face, not pity, more like recognition. "Can you hold for an hour?" she said. "I want to bring someone over." The someone turned out to be 2 people. A product manager from Groundwork's Midwest division, and a man named Patrick Dunn, who introduced himself as a supply chain consultant, but asked questions that sounded more like a due diligence interview. Serena answered all of them. She showed them the field reports. She demonstrated the device on the soil sample. She'd brought in a small container, a habit, something she'd added to her packing list as an afterthought 3 days before the showcase. The prototype returned a reading in 87 seconds. Patrick looked at the number. He looked at Serena's reference chart. He looked at Patrick, at Eleanor, and said, "Huh." It was a small sound. But in the language of people who evaluated products for a living, Serena had learned, huh meant something had exceeded an expectation. Wren had fallen asleep in the folding chair, her coloring book open across her lap, a half-colored horse frozen mid-gallop on the page. Eleanor watched her for a moment. "How old?" she said quietly. 8, Serena said. Eleanor nodded. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't need to. It was shortly after noon when Colton Mercer came back around the pillar. He wasn't looking at table 47. He was walking with his associates again, slightly faster now, the way people move when they've had a productive morning and feel the momentum of it. He was mid-sentence when he registered the small cluster of people standing at the booth he'd dismissed 3 hours earlier. He stopped. Eleanor Tate was there. He knew her. Everyone in agricultural supply knew Eleanor Tate. Patrick Dunn he recognized too. And a third person had joined them, a younger woman with a Groundwork badge who was writing something in a notepad. Colton's eyes moved to Serena. She was standing at the center of the group, patient and exact, walking them through a question about scalable production. She did not look like someone running a high school science fair project. She looked like someone who had spent 6 years learning a problem from the ground up and another 2 solving it. He stood there for a moment, just a moment. Then he stepped forward. "Colton Mercer," he said, extending his hand toward Eleanor. "Agravance Capital. I was actually just speaking with Miss Voss," Serena said without looking at him. "We met earlier." Eleanor glanced between them. Her expression was unreadable. "Colton," she said, shaking his hand briefly. She turned back to Serena. "You were saying about the production timeline." Colton stood there for 2 more seconds. Nobody turned to include him. Nobody asked what Agravance Capital thought. He walked away. One of his associates fell into step beside him, and Colton said nothing. His jaw was set in the particular way of a man recalibrating something he'd been certain of. Wren woke up at 12:40 with a coloring book crease on her cheek and immediately looked for her mother. Serena was on the phone, standing just outside the booth, speaking quietly. She had one hand pressed flat against her sternum, a habit Wren recognized, something her mother did when she was concentrating hard on staying calm. When she came back, Wren said, "Are they going to buy your thing?" Serena sat down next to her. "They might," she said. "Eleanor wants to do a follow-up meeting next week, a real one, at their offices. Is that good?" "That's very good." Wren considered this. "Is that the lady who was nice?" "Yes." "I like her," Wren said. She picked up her crayon and went back to the horse. Serena sat there for a moment, looking at her daughter, the crease on her cheek, the easy certainty with which she'd returned to the coloring book, the complete absence of doubt. 8 years old, and already certain that her mother was going to figure it out. She thought about Colton's face. The moment he had stood at the edge of their conversation and understood what he had walked past that morning. She wasn't angry about it anymore. She had stopped being angry somewhere around the moment Eleanor Tate had said, "Can you hold for an hour?" What she felt now was quieter and more solid than anger. It was the particular satisfaction of someone who had done the work, brought the data, and waited. The follow-up meeting was in Minneapolis, 12 days later. Serena drove up the night before, Wren staying with her sister in Decatur. She checked into a mid-range hotel that cost more than she wanted to spend and sat at the small desk in her room going through her numbers one more time. Not because she wasn't ready, because it was the only way she knew how to sleep. Groundwork Agricultural Supplies offices were on the 14th floor of a glass building near the river. The conference room had a view Serena would remember for a long time. The Mississippi in November light, gray and wide, moving without hurry toward somewhere else. Eleanor was there, Patrick Dunn. 2 other people Serena hadn't met. A VP of product integration and a legal liaison, which meant they were already thinking about contracts. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. By the end of it, Groundwork had proposed a pilot distribution agreement. 20 units placed with 4 cooperative networks across Minnesota and Iowa, with a structured review at 90 days. The numbers were real. The timeline was real. Eleanor slid a letter of intent across the table and said, "We'd like to move quickly on this if you're amenable." Serena looked at the letter. 11 months in a garage, 14 field environments, 4 hours to Chicago with a prototype wrapped in a dish towel. "I'm amenable," she said. She called her sister on the drive home. Her sister asked how it went, and Serena said, "It went," and her sister immediately understood that something had happened, something large, because Serena's voice was doing a thing it only did when she was trying not to cry. "Tell me," her sister said. So Serena told her, the booth by the emergency exit, the man with the silver temples who'd told her to try a farmer's market, Eleanor Tate reading the information card twice, Wren asleep in the folding chair with the half-colored horse. She told it in order, the way it had happened, and by the time she got to the letter of intent she was crying, not hard, just steadily, the way you cry when something that cost you a great deal finally returns something back. Her sister was quiet for a moment. "She looked at the card twice," her sister said. "She read it twice. That's when you knew. That's when I knew." They stayed on the phone for another hour. Serena drove south through the dark with the heater on and the flat land opening up around her and the letter of intent folded carefully in the outside pocket of her bag. The pilot launched in March. By the 60-day review, 3 of the 4 cooperative networks had requested additional units. One network manager sent Eleanor an email that she forwarded to Serena without comment, just the email itself. "This tool has saved us roughly 12 hours of field assessment per week. Our guys won't go out without it now." The 90-day review became a conversation about scaling. Eleanor sat across from Serena in the same Minneapolis conference room and said, "We want to talk about a broader distribution agreement, 15 states. We'd want exclusivity for the first 2 years." Serena had spent the previous week on the phone with a small business attorney in Springfield who had helped her understand what exclusivity meant and what it was worth. She came into that meeting knowing her number. She had written it on a notepad she kept in her jacket pocket, and she had not looked at it once during the meeting because she didn't need to. She looked at Eleanor. 15 states, 2-year exclusivity. I'd need the per-unit margin to reflect that restriction, she said. Here's what I'd need to make that work. She named the number. Eleanor didn't flinch. She made a note. She said she'd take it back to the team. 3 days later, they called with a counteroffer that was 6% below what Serena had asked for. Serena's attorney helped her frame a response that closed the gap at 3% below. Groundwork accepted. The agreement was signed on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Serena was sitting in her car in the parking lot of Wren's school, waiting for pickup, when the countersigned documents came through on her phone. She sat there reading them. Then she got out of the car and stood in the spring air and did something she almost never did in public. She pressed both hands over her mouth and laughed. Colton Mercer's name came back to her once more that fall. She was at a smaller regional conference in St. Louis, a panel on agricultural technology, and she was on it this time, not behind a table by the emergency exit. The moderator introduced her, Serena Voss, founder and CEO of Voss Fabrication, current distribution partner with Groundwork Agricultural Supply across 15 states. During the Q&A, someone asked about early setbacks. What was the hardest moment, they wanted to know? What almost stopped her? Serena thought about it honestly. There was a man at a showcase last year, she said. He picked up my prototype and told me it looked like a high school science fair project. Told me to start with a farmer's market. She paused. He was trying to be helpful, I think. He just had no idea what he was looking at. The room was quiet for a moment. What did you do? The moderator asked. I put the prototype back on the table, Serena said, and I waited for the right person to stop. Afterward, a young woman came up to her, early 30s, nervous, carrying a tote bag that clearly had something important in it. She introduced herself, stumbled a little over her own name, and said she had a product she'd been developing for 2 years and she wasn't sure it was ready, and she didn't know if she should be at these things yet. Serena looked at her. Is your data solid? She said. The woman said yes. Then you should be here, Serena said. Bring something to demonstrate it. Bring your documentation. And if someone tells you to start smaller, she thought of Colton's cuffs, the small sound his associate had made. Let them finish, nod politely, and keep your booth open. The young woman nodded. She looked like someone who had just been handed something she'd needed for a long time. Serena took her business card from her pocket and held it out. It had a logo now. Clean lines, her name, Voss Fabrication in small exact type, the kind of card that got kept.